Hey everyone, how's it going? I hope you're all doing great, as I always say, following the 3 H's of the channel and all that good stuff. And in this video, it's a weird one, so strap in. We got voices singing the national anthem off in the trees. We have things happening in the Shawnee National Forest, some high strangeness in Marfa, and more. So, pull up a stump with me, and let's jump into it. Thank you for watching. Somewhere around August of 2019, me and a buddy decided to go camping up on the Mogollon Rim, and to be honest, I'm not quite sure what he saw. I've been camping and visiting up there for as long as I can remember, but we kinda wanted our own spot, so we found some old forest roads and went as far back as we could. But then we hit a fence saying that if we crossed, we would be on Indian res. So we drove along the fence for a while and then turned down a trail and found a spot. It was pretty nice, but it gave us a kinda weird vibe. We ignored it and set up camp. But the entire time that we were there, it was ungodly silent. We arrived fairly early in the day, but never heard any birds or anything for that matter. We eventually started up a decent fire with the wood that I brought, but again, the entire time, it never felt quite right. No crickets or cicadas or anything. By 10 or 11 o'clock, I knew something was really off. We stuck it out until about 1 a.m., but then I decided that it was time for us to get the hell out of there. We started packing up quickly, not really hastily. We are both using our flashlights to scan the trees and whatnot. I didn't see anything, but about 10 minutes after we started though, my friend says, "Throw it in the truck, we need to get the hell out of here." So we did. I didn't ask questions, until we got on the road for a little bit. When I asked, he said there was something. It was skinny, it was very pale, almost white, very messy hair that was matted all around it. It had really long fingers with claws at the end. It was peeking behind a tree, watching us. When it made eye contact with my friend, it smiled at him. We went to a family member's cabin to spend the night. Anyone know what my friend saw? I think it may have been a you-know-what, a skinwalker that was territorial, but not really violent, just wanted us gone, out of its territory. Anyone who's lived on a reservation knows that they can get pretty crazy sometimes. One time, my sister's boyfriend, his name is Forrest, was out with some friends. They were all walking along the side of the road when they passed by a cemetery. All of a sudden, one of his friends starts acting weird and says that he needs to go to the cemetery. Naturally, they're all dumbfounded. They have no earthly idea why he wants to go to the cemetery at night. They keep trying to talk him out of it, but he keeps saying that he really needs to go there. He tries running through the fog and into the cemetery, but they catch him and hold him down. They kept telling him to calm down, to tell them what's wrong, but he still struggled. He finally said, with his eyes rolled back in his head, "Let me go. I need to go. They're calling out to me, the voices." They ended up having to knock him out and hauling him back home. He woke up later and he didn't have any recollection of even walking by the graveyard. For him, they started to go for a walk, and now he's back at his house. Another time, This one also took place on the res. Forrest's friend was really mad at someone else, and it was late outside. The sun was just going down, and was walking home, super mad. He even rejected his friend's offer for a ride due to the severity of the argument. While he was walking down the road, he encounters a man. The man wore one of those heavy trench coats. He couldn't make out the guy's face due to the darkness. He passed by the man, and the man said, "Hey, nice night out tonight, huh?" The friend stopped. I think his name is Rob. So Rob stops and turns around and says, yeah. The man tried making small talk and asked if he had a light. Rob handed him his lighter. The man held his hand to his face so the wind wouldn't put out the lighter. Just as he flicked the lighter on, Rob caught a glimpse of his face. Normal, all except for the eyes. They were pure black. Rob turned and booked it out of there. He ran, not looking back. I've been fortunate, or unfortunate, depending on how you view it, enough to have a kind of spooky experience myself. Back when I was in high school, over a decade ago, I was walking around with my friend in the woods. These woods were just behind his house. We've been in those woods thousands of times since we were in elementary school. We were just chatting and talking about girls and all that stuff as you usually do in high school, and we come up to this rocky hill. There was open sky above. Later in the day, too. It's not quite dusk, but dusk is coming pretty fast. This isn't usually a problem. Again, I've been in this place more times than we can count, even at night. We've even walked this exact path. We stop on the hill, just talking, just to catch our breath. Between our talking, we hear something else. My friend says, "Hold up, do you hear that?" We stop for a second and just listen to the forest. We can hear singing. It's very faint, and it's coming from deep in the woods. Somebody's singing the Star-Spangled Banner, but our neck hairs rise up and stand on end. We listen for a second. It sounds dissonant, like there's something wrong with it. We decide that we should check it out. To go in the direction of the singing, the path goes a little way down the hill and then takes a bend back into the trees. As we turn the bend, we both end up stopping in our tracks. The entrance back to the woods from the hill is practically a wall of darkness. It doesn't seem like it usually does. It seems darker, more foreboding, and there's still this barely perceptible singing coming from somewhere in the woods. As much as we try, neither of us can force ourselves to move another inch forward. It's like we're being held back. We eventually try to just turn around and leave, but now that we're trying to leave, it's like we're walking through thick snow. It's almost impossible to go forward. All the while, there's still this singing just on a loop of the Star-Spangled Banner, very deep in the woods and very dissonant. Each step we take, the next one gets a little easier, and then a little easier, until we can eventually run back the way we came to my friend's house. And that's pretty much it. It might sound kinda silly in retrospect, being scared of someone singing the national anthem in the woods and not being able to move and stuff, but at the time, hearing it and coming up to the mouth of the woods, basically every instinct was screaming at us to leave. The additional bonus thing is that when my friend talked about it later, we both heard the same singing, but we heard two different voices. I heard an adult man, and he swore it was a little girl. So first things first, out in West Texas, there's a rundown shack off the side of the road, and I mean way off the side of the road. The only reason I found it is because I drove from Houston to Marfa to check out what all the hubbub was about. People in my social circle go gaga over Marfa. It's like a mecca for art hoes and hipsters apparently, but also it's a gorgeous place. There were clear, open skies, nights full of stars. We don't get this sort of thing in Houston. I spent most of my youth in the country, so it's a welcome experience to see all the beautiful wilderness. I feel like a kid again. I stay there for a week, and towards the end, I feel like if anything, the city itself gets in the way of all that natural beauty. So I shift gears, I buy a tent, pack some food, then I hit the highway. Somewhere between Marfa and Alpine, just before sunset, I pull my Jeep off the road and I drive into the Chihuahua desert. Not gonna lie, I had scenes of Native American vision quests dancing through my mind. Maybe this trip could be an awakening for me of some sort. But with no map and no real cell service, it's a little like sailing out into the open sea, all alone, without a compass. Not to bore you, but most of my life back home revolved around work, bills, and family problems. Lonely nights at the bar, the occasional bad date, blah blah blah. This is all just to say that I guess I've been searching for a reset button, and driving into that desert felt kinda cool. It's now sunset, and I see something. A small hill. It's all jagged along the left side, like somebody had blown out a part of it. I thought, maybe it's a mining operation. The jagged side is all lit up by the setting sun, so you couldn't exactly miss it, but you also couldn't quite make it out entirely. I speed toward it, feeling like Mad Max, a cloud of dust behind me. It takes a while. By the time I actually make it around the hill, and I'm facing the blown out side, the sun has already set. It's pitch black, just my headlights. My Jeep rolls to a stop, and my headlights catch something about 50 feet away. An old rundown shack sitting in front of the rocky face of the hill. It looks like a spooky face gaping at me. The two front windows are busted open, and the front door is missing. Something about it has a sense of foreboding. At this point, I'm actually a little spooked. This isn't too far from cartel territory. What if I find bodies piled inside, I think. I talk myself out of it. I'm just letting my imagination run away with me. I shut off the Jeep and walk towards the shack. It's quiet. I'm talking about dead silence. Nothing but the crunching sound of my footsteps. There's no skittering of rabbits. There's no wind. It's just like the desert is holding its breath. As I approach the shack and notice that the front door isn't missing, it's just a few feet in front of the doorway. It's like it's been blown right off the hinges. Inside, the place is barren. A staircase to my right leads up to a second story, which seems odd. From the outside, the place looks like a single story. From the base, I can't make out anything upstairs. I think to myself, I really should have left my headlights on. It might not be so dark in here. It's too late for that though. I march up the creepy steps, and that's when things get weird. First of all, the whole upstairs is furnished completely. Nothing fancy, but decently done. On a small table sits a round wooden box. I'm curious as to what's inside. Just then, in the distance, I hear what sounds like an engine rumbling. It sounds like a big truck speeding towards the shack. Like, man, this thing must be flying. I figure I ought to get out of there, but my curiosity wins out. I walk over to the box to open it when I realize there is something in the room with me. It's dark, but I can make a figure out in the far corner. I feel paralyzed, not even scared, just like I can't move. Outside, I hear an engine rumbling loudly, then a weird sound. Have you ever heard a calf calling for its mother? This sounded very similar, only it was quick, almost like a barking. I hear a bunch of these outside. Then I hear something downstairs, then coming up the steps. The steps are slow and heavy. I begin to feel very weak, like I'm really drunk. Then the figure in the corner walks over to me. It touches me on the neck. Everything goes black. When I woke up, I was in my Jeep, but it wasn't where I parked it. There was no shack, and I didn't see the rocky face of a hill. It was just up against a big-ass cactus, and I felt extremely hungover. I managed to find my way to the highway, and I figured out that I was by Fort Davis, which is like 30 minutes from either Marfa or Alpine. I have no recollection of what happened, or what that thing in the building was, or what the noises were. Nothing. When I was just a kid, maybe around 11, 12 years old, my uncle took me and my little cousin on a hunting trip in the Shawnee National Forest, which is where I grew up, considering my dad thought it necessary to build 20 miles away from any sign of civilization. It was deer season, and up until then, I had never shot an animal before, or really shot a gun, so it was exciting, as well as a bit scary for me. I got my boots on, and my uncle made sure that we put on extra deer pee because he thought it was funny. We set out at about 3:30 in the morning. It was still dark out, and the trees, making the forest pitch black, didn't help my overactive imagination at the time. We set up 2 deer stands, one for me. I complained about having to share one with my cousin on my lap, and one for my uncle and my cousin sitting on his lap. I was barely holding the gun. My uncle had no faith in me and said that it might be better if we set the deer stands a bit further apart than usual. He thought that I would scare away the deer by talking. So I was in this stand by myself in the dark as hell woods. When 4:30 rolled around, I finally had enough of waiting. I was impatient, and I climbed down off the tree stand and started walking deeper into the forest. Now it was starting to light up. I didn't worry too much about what I could find, considering that I had a gun with me. I walked a good half a mile or so until I came up on a clearing. All I saw was some tall grass and a pile of leaves in the center of the flat. I walked around the edge of the clearing, trying to see if there were any running streams I could follow so that I might find something to kill. When I noticed that it was a bit odd for a pile of leaves to be out here in the middle of a clearing in the middle of nowhere, I took a closer look at the pile from afar, noticing that it seemed lopsided. I took a few steps toward the pile, and then I heard a sound. a sound I can only describe as someone gurgling snot. Then, this massive creature rose out of the pile, had to be 8 or 9 feet tall, and looked like some Neanderthal with hair covering about every place on its body except for the face. Of course, when I saw this colossal beast, I was terrified, totally overwhelmed by fear. I started freaking out. My breathing increased. My heart rate felt like it was 2,000 beats a second. My eyes were bigger than an anime character. I turned and booked it, as far and as fast as my legs could carry me, all the way back to my deer stand. I looked behind me, and this thing was following me. Even more the reason to run faster than Usain Bolt going down the track. I got to my stand and climbed all the way to the top in about 3 seconds. I didn't sit down. Screw that. I stood on the stand and looked down to find this, what I now consider to be a Bigfoot. But it was gone. It either gave up following me, or it was hiding. Either way, I wasn't going down into the forest floor without an AR on standby. I probably waited in the stand for a good hour. It was around 6 when my uncle showed up with my cousin and said it was time that we start heading back. I, of course, told him what happened. "Kirk, I saw a big hairy creature down there." He said, "That's why we're hunting deer. You're supposed to shoot them." I said, "But it wasn't a deer. It looked like a Bigfoot." My uncle laughed and said, "Okay, sure, buddy." And that was it for my argument. I came down, looking everywhere, trying to see if that thing was waiting somewhere. We started to head back, and on the way, my uncle said that he had to take a leak, and that he left his gun and my little cousin with me. He was maybe 3 to 5 minutes longer than it should have been. When my uncle comes back, he's white as snow. I say, "What's wrong, Kirk?" He says, we should get out of here." I never gave it any more thought. Growing up, I figured I just imagined the whole thing. But I recently asked my uncle about the old times, and when I brought up the hunting trip, he got that same look on his face the morning of the hunt when he came back from taking a leak. This part here is my uncle's account. So when I left Connor with you, I walked over to the roadbed and down the hill to take a leak. When I found a place out of your guys' sight, I saw a deer down the hill. I was going to run up and get my gun from you so we don't show up empty-handed. But just as I was about to leave, I see this big-ass hairy man, like the one you described, run up to this thing and tackle it. I was looking from behind a tree about 30 yards away, and this thing grabbed the poor deer by its antlers and thrashed its head until even I could hear the neck shatter. The thing started to drag it by its hind legs deeper into the forest, the same direction that you had seen the thing. After that, I asked my uncle something else. He was clearly not enjoying telling me this story. So we had a few beers, and I started to drive home. I now live in Carbondale, which is a college town, and about 2 hours from my uncle's house. I lived in the forest originally about 15 minutes away from his house, so naturally, I stopped at the old house on my way home, and I decided to go poke around in the outer part of the woods, just remembering the good times I had, climbing the trees when I was a kid and playing hide and seek. And as I'm there, just poking around, I hear the most spine-chilling scream I've ever heard in my life. It sounded like a man, but it didn't sound afraid. It sounded territorial. I turned around, I got in my car, and I've never gone back to those woods. So, what'd you think of those? Let me know which one was your favorite one down in the comments. Do you have one of your own? I have an email in the description below that you can send them to if you'd like to. And if you've sent one already and it hasn't been in a video yet, it's gonna be, don't worry. Down there as well are ways to donate to the channel if you would like to, a PayPal and a Patreon, and super thanks here on YouTube. And just watching the video is very helpful too, and it kind of grows the community. More stumps for everybody. And one thing that I would like to say, I may have mentioned it in a different video, because sometimes I kind of talk about, all the weird things that have happened to me in my life. With the shack, I didn't have an experience like that, but the fact that the shack was gone, that reminds me of this little area. It's kind of hard to find, but it's a ways away from where I live, and sometimes there's a camp there, and sometimes there's not. It's really weird. Sometimes you'll drive by there, and there will be a camp there, and then you drive back about 20 minutes later, and there's no camp there. It's one of the strange things of the area that I live in. There's also the thing too about hearing singing in the woods, or hearing your name being called in the woods. Chances are, if you are deep in the woods or hiking along and you heard your name being called, your best bet is to just ignore it and continue on. Unless you actually are lost, then someone's probably trying to help you. But if you're just hiking along in an area and you all of a sudden hear your name being called deeper in the woods, no, you didn't. Just continue on. I remember when I was a teenager, probably about 13 or 14, I was spending the night at my friend's house, and we used to go explore the woods back behind the old school that we used to go to. There was the school, then a graveyard, and then it's just woods. And there's an area that's very swampy back there, or it was then. I don't really know what it's like back there now, but back then it was really swampy. So we're walking along, talking about video games or TV shows or whatever we were talking about, and we hear his name being called way out in the swamp. And he's like, there's nothing out there. And I'm like, I know, there's nothing out there. It's just swamp and trees. So we just turned around and started walking back to his house, which was a ways away. And anytime we heard it after that, it's like it was getting angrier with him. Like it was really wanting him to come out to the swamp. And by the time we got back to his house, it was right around dusk or so. And this was the summer, so it's like 9:30, 9:45. And it stopped pretty much when we got to the graveyard. I wish I had a better description of the trails, but they're all very topsy-turvy, wibbly-wobbly kind of thing. Sometimes they go straight, then they'll zigzag off, and it's a whole thing. It's very easy to get lost out there if you don't know your way around or don't know certain landmarks. So it's a good thing that we were together, and it's a good thing that we knew not to reply to, something calling your name from out in the swamp. But anyways, I'll leave it there. Thank you for pulling up a stump. Thank you for watching, and I hope you have a good week.